And Amir, we are back again with another episode of Black Belts and Boardrooms. I am very excited about today. I woke up, I had a protein shake, that get you energized. When I get one of those protein shakes, I feel like I can lift a mini bus. Always good to start the day off with a great protein shake. I know other people probably say the same thing, but today is another special one. And Amir, what's on your mind today?
Oh my gosh, protein shake and minibuses? Renard, killing me with those analogies, but they're so visual, I love it. So, alright, so you gave me a visual analogy. I'm gonna share with you something that I've been thinking about today. Now, y you and I, strong passion for dojo, not a secret. This podcast is really born because of our love for the martial arts. But one of the things I was thinking about today was, when I'm training on the mat, when I'm sparring with somebody and I think I've got the coolest moves, but man, within a split seconds, if I get kicked in my face, whoo, talk about being schooled, right? And you can probably relate to examples when you were training in the dojo. So what I'm thinking about today is really, how do I handle that situation? How do I get better in the moment? And then if I turn it around now from the leadership lens and corporate leadership as well, what does that actually look like? And the word I landed on, and I think you're going to love this, is emotional intelligence. You know,
Mm.
being kicked in the face, that ain't nice. Nobody likes to be kicked in the face or punched in the stomach or whatever, right? You don't want to be hit. But then how do you recover from that? How do you then, now as an instructor on the mat, tell your student, hey, you know what? Take a deep breath. It's okay. And if it's a kid, they're crying. There are tears on the floor. I've had that happen to me, you know? And I'm sure you've seen a tear or two in your time as well. So
Oh,
the theme I want to riff on with you today is emotional intelligence, Renard.
ooh, man. I will say that is a tough one for many. Emotional intelligence. There's probably been many times, especially training jujitsu, that I've been tapped by a lower belt. It happens all the time. Sometimes it happens. You get caught, and you start thinking, and you start getting a little angry about it. Be like, how did I let this happen? I'm an upper belt, etc. But I started changing my mind frame that everything is an opportunity. So with emotional intelligence, mentally look at it as an opportunity. I started sitting down after, I would lose a match or something like that. And then I started analyzing it. What could I done better? How can I get better from it, etc. Start having that composure, still shaking the person's hand. Thank you. Great match. Even though I was so frustrated that I could have just let it out and it wouldn't have came off right. So even in the corporate world, emotional intelligence is one of the key things as us being leaders, as executives. You have to be calm, cool, and collected. That I like to say. At all times, regardless of the situation. That's part of that emotional intelligence, understanding the circumstance, the situation, and how am I going to lead the team through this chaos, this fire, this critical issue without going crazy myself. So emotional intelligence is something that I think people learn over time. It's not something you just automatically do. Sometimes you're going to say what's really on your mind when you're frustrated, when you're angry, but you know you start learning from that. So I think there's many examples of that. But what are your thoughts on it, Amir? How do you feel about emotional intelligence? What have been some times where you had to really get composed on that fact?
There's plenty of situations that I can think of, Renard, and I think emotional intelligence is such a dynamic word that, it's going to take a lifetime. And maybe you can never become an expert in emotional intelligence. You're always constantly practicing. So I'll answer in two ways. One is there's personal emotional regulation that comes with emotional intelligence. How do you, when faced with adversity, regulate yourself? And that does require certain level of awareness, which could be translated to intelligence about yourself. And one example would be, like I said, kicked in the face, jars you, punched in the gut, jars you. How do you come back from that to then say, okay, I'm ready for the next round. Let's do it. Right. Second way is, let's say you're at work, you're doing your, quarterly reviews, let's say, with an employee. How do you make sure that that conversation is going to be beneficial to your teammate more so than to yourself? Because at the end of the day, just like my instructors helped me become a better martial artist, as a leader in my enterprise, I'm responsible to making sure that my teammate are succeeding and they're meeting their aspirations on their terms. And that requires a significant amount of emotional intelligence. So those are two ways in which I think of, and there's others. What are some of the ways in which you think about it, Renard?
Man, for me, I think I would agree. Like you say, you're having one on ones. People are frustrated. How do you wrangle that in for the most part? How do you get someone who's at a certain level and bring them down to calmness? And this always goes back to me when I talk about this a lot. And it's calmness and darkness. Jujitsu puts you in a lot of positions that you are very uncomfortable with, and sometimes you're going to get tapped out, you're going to get put to sleep, you're going to get angry about it, you're going to get frustrated, but it starts to regulate you. You start understanding, things start moving slower, you start understanding what you have to do next. Same thing for when you're dealing with your team, when you're dealing with fires that we talked about earlier. It's regulating your emotions but also learning how to manage other people's emotions. It's another superpower that we go back and say that it's not on your job description, but it's a superpower for you as a leader, is that emotional intelligence, understanding the lay of the land, understanding the people that work for you, and how you can keep people, optimal for the most part. Keep them regulated in a sense, so everybody can be on the same page and keep winning. Keep getting those projects done on time, keep improving things for the business, not just the department, but the business. And that comes with emotional intelligence. Like you said, you're gonna get frustrated. There's a lot of inner turmoil that goes on with everybody. Everybody. Some people are gonna let it out. Some people are gonna know how to regulate it and present the right face, if that makes sense, when they're in the boardroom, when they're in the meeting, when they're on the one-on-one, in order to get that topic or that discussion through. One-on-ones are big. A lot of times people don't want to hear what you have to say, especially when it's coming from the right place, but it might be negative to them. So you have to understand who you're talking to, what are the key words that's gonna have them be an active listener to understand, hey, I'm not trying to beat you down in a sense, but I'm trying to let you know these are the things you need to work on so you keep improving. So it goes around like we always talk the flywheel of circle. Emotional intelligence is big. It's another superpower you have to have in order to be a great leader.
I love the way you framed it. Superpower that you need in order to be a great leader. So let's make that practical then for the listeners. So one of the ways in which I think about learning to be more emotionally intelligent is to be more reflective, because as a human being, I've recognized that I am used to modeling other people, which means that if I can recognize something that I do within myself, then it means to say I understand how my body reacts, which makes it easier for me to then understand what do I need to do next. So, for instance, let's say I'm in a conversation with somebody and that person just happens to be a very negative, toxic type personality. And I know that triggers me. I know that my mind races and ideas are going through very fast. And that could cause me to say or react in a way that's not appropriate, because I will let that emotion wash over me. So, to make it practical, I'm going to say one of the ways in which leaders can harness the superpowers to learn about themselves, make sure that they are understanding how their physical self shows up when you meet people in a specific situation, like that example I just used. There could be many other situations, but just identify, quantify, and understand what your body does. So that would be one way in which we can make it practical. How are some of the ways in which you make it practical for yourself to train to be emotionally intelligent?
So I love what you said, and I'm gonna add something into that. Understand yourself before you try to understand others. That's that's what I took away from that. Understand yourself before you try to understand others. And being able to understand, like you said, what triggers, what are your triggers and how to regulate those so you're always at that calm state when you're in the office. A lot of times for me, the reason I am so calm is because of jujitsu, because of martial arts. All that rage that I have goes out onto the mat. So when I go to work, then I'm calm, I'm cool. I understand that there's chaos going on, but I'm able to make sound decisions because my emotions are in check. I don't take anything personal. And I will say, if you want to go to emotional intelligence, don't take everything personal. Don't take everything personal. This is a business. This is work. Yes, we are there 8 to 12 hours a day. But you got to remember at the end of the day, it is a business. Do not take anything personal. People are making business decisions. They're not making personal decisions. They're making business decisions. They're analyzing, they're understanding what's going to be growth for the business and what's going to mitigate risk for the business. None of that is personal. So you have to have the emotional intelligence to understand when I walk into the office, the decisions that we're made, it's not personal, it's business. And don't get me wrong, sometimes business is ugly. It is. It's just the nature of the beast. Sometimes business is ugly, but to understand that you're making business decisions. Everything that goes when we're on a project, it's a business decision. It's not a personal decision. Um, so I think that's one of the key things that I always look at when it comes to emotional intelligence. Walking in, get out the car, get out the truck like I do, and I walk into the office. This is business. The decisions that we make are business minded decisions. When the executives are in a boardroom meeting, they're not talking about making personal decisions. They're making decisions for the business. So everyone has to be emotionally intelligent to understand what's going on in that circumstance. So I would definitely say the major thing I would tell anybody, tell our listeners, don't take business personal. It's business.
Yeah. That's easier said than done, Renard.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
lot of our folks with the best of intentions can fall into the trap of thinking it feels personal. And I'll own up to it. My younger self felt that a few times where it felt like it was personal. Obviously, me today knows a lot better than that. A lot of that I'll attribute also again to what I learned on the mat and in the dojo. But at the end of the day, let's keep on this theme of making it actionable for our listeners, Renard. So one of the ways, just picking up on what you're saying, how do I separate my personal emotion from the business piece of it? The analogy or the framing that I use for myself is that, so right now I'm serving my organization as an operational engineering leader. So I lead a site reliability engineering organization, and in my mind, when I think about my organization and the systems that we support, I ask myself, what I'm about to ask my team or what my team is doing, does it answer one simple question, which is it going to make my systems more reliable in production? Whether it's a business process or an architecture change or design, whatever the case may be, does it serve this goal? Will it make my system more reliable? Not fast, okay? Just reliable. And that could mean many things. Is it going to break often? Is it going to be difficult to support in production, etc.? So to 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 actually close on that thought, I would say think about what is that one simple framing that you can give to yourself that will ground you on the ideas that make you who you are so that then you can quickly build up to whatever the situation is asking you to do.
Mm, man, that's good. That I be honest, I just learned something today. I just learned something today. So that's why I love doing this podcast. We learn in the middle of a conversation, and I just learned something from that. And I agree. I think you have to build that emotional intelligence. You have to build it over time. Like you said, I too have faltered in my young career and took stuff personally, and it didn't work out well when I took stuff personally at work.
Never
It took
does.
a while to understand that some of these decisions that are being made have nothing to do with me personally. It's a business minded decision. And I also think when you come to emotional intelligence, and I'm going to go to a team factor. When it comes to your team, the team has to gel together for everyone to be on the same page emotionally, if that makes sense. So that means when you're interviewing somebody for the team, how is that person going to gel with the team outside of the skills, outside of all the certifications, etc.? How is that person going to gel with the team? I've seen teams where somebody new comes in, disrupts the entire synergy of the team because they don't gel well with the team. And I'll be honest, that's one of the major things I look for when I'm trying to hire somebody. It's outside of hey, you can have a great resume, you can have all these certifications, PMP, MBA, etc. But the one major thing I look for is how is that person going to gel with the team? Are we going to still be able to move in a fast pace that we do now? Or is that person going to start hindering us? Is he or she or whomever going to be a problem for the team? And I've seen it both ways. I've seen we add somebody in, it upskills the entire team. Everybody gets better. And then I've seen where we pop somebody in, all of a sudden problems start happening. That fast fuel that we were doing before now is going down. Now it's going down. Everybody got a problem with something. We're moving slower. So that's another part of that emotional intelligence when you got to look at emotionally, like how is that person going to gel with my team? I'm going to still be able to lead, but then all of a sudden you start seeing little cracks in your team when you add the wrong person in, and that's that emotion that happens. The person that's negative, like you talked about earlier, the negative person always there's something always wrong. The person you put on a team, something always wrong. You ask them like, hey, when are we going to have this task done? Well, A, B, and C, blah blah blah. They always have an issue with it. So that goes another part of what we're talking about today. How does that emotional intelligence, how does that affect a team, or how does that bring that team up?
All right, I think you just up-leveled this conversation, my friend.
Ooh, thank
So
you.
we were talking about individuals and emotional intelligence, but I think you're hitting on another level, which is how do I now take emotional level or collective emotional intelligence of my team, and how do I make sure that those dynamics are going to resonate so that the team isn't bothered or hampered in any way? Because we're all emotional beings at the end of the day. We all influence each other. You and I, when we're talking, we influence each other, we learn from each other, and so do our team members. If we show up in a conversation and the team is just gelling and doing their thing, we recognize as leaders that our role power has influence in that room, in that space, in that moment, you know? So again, try to be practical here, Renard. What are some of the ways in which you assess an individual if they're going to be a good fit for your team from an emotional intelligence perspective?
So, of course, we're talking about outside of your normal tech skills. I think it's soft skills. Soft
Yeah.
skills is a major key for that emotional side. So, conversation wise, are they a person who understands tasks that come along and how to get those done? How do they also respond when a critical issue comes along? So I like to give when I'm sitting there looking for a candidate, I like to give scenarios like most people do. Different scenarios of how would handle it. And it doesn't have anything to do with technical wise, it has to do with emotionally. How would they deal with it? If I'm asking you, we got a critical issue and you're going to have to stay late at night, how are you going to handle that? Are you going to be okay with it? Or once it gets to a certain time, you start cracking. and you start getting frustrated. Why are we still here? Why this can't get fixed? So you start asking scenarios for them in that early part when you're doing your little recruiting, you're interviewing, etc. That's when you start understanding where their emotional intelligence is. Also, I want to add another great thing is, and this segues when you're finding the next leader for your team. Who is ready to step up when you take a vacation or you move to another company? Who's the next person who's going to be able to step up into your former shoes and still be that emotional leader for the rest of the team? Because some people want to aspire to be management leadership, but that emotional intelligence goes into your soft skills. Like we talked about, emotional intelligence is a superpower. You're gonna have to tap into that and understand that when you're the leader of the team, your emotions have to be in check in order for everybody else to be able to follow you and understand what you need to get done next.
Wow. So I'm going to guess you have a library of these scenarios, Renard, because that sounds to me like you
Yeah,
do.
yeah, yeah. So many of them, and I think that just happens over time. I think that happens with anybody that moves on in their career, understanding. I think in a sense you have to sit there and review some of your past mistakes and your past wins, dealing with your emotions, and how do you see the opportunity in order to change that mindset. I think we all had to do it over time in our careers. I've had to do it. I still do it today. I always say that I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. I'm not the same person 10 years ago. I change every time, and that's that part of growth. Emotions are very big in that, and that's part of growth and getting better at your craft. So when it's time for you to sit in that boardroom, time for you to be the CEO of X company, you're ready because, and trust me, when you become a CEO, especially Fortune 500 company, and they have you on TV, your emotions are going to have to really be in check on those on those situations. You don't want to crack under pressure. That's one thing. And the one thing I always say is never let them see you sweat. Never let them see you sweat. No matter what goes on, don't let them see you sweat. Another part of your emotional intelligence superpower. Never let them see you sweat.
Yeah, that's sage advice. Something you just now touched on, succession planning. That's something I think about a lot. That next leader in the organization. One of the ways in which I work is I always think to myself, I'm going to work in whatever capacity I'm in now, with the intention of moving away into something else. Because to me, again, it goes back to the idea that, I want to constantly add value. And once I'm done adding value in one area, I want to add value so that there's consistent improvement. And also to your point, you look back, and those are exactly how we gain insight into the wins, into how we change. And that's a lesson I had to learn over time as well, is that make sure you're always looking back. Make sure you're always looking at the wins, and don't dwell on the things that didn't go so well, because those are opportunities to learn, but don't dwell on them. Take the lesson and move on. But to come back to succession planning, which is an important aspect, because part of being a linchpin in any organization is making sure you left it better than what it was. And that's why I think about succession planning as an important attribute of any leader. How are you thinking about your team? How are you thinking about the next leader who can come in if it is within your organization? And if it is not within your organization, just be honest. It's not within your organization. But no matter who you have directly reporting to, at least this is how I like to think about it, is you want to know what their aspirations are. You want to know what skills they need to get better at or practice more of, and excuse me, help them. At the end of the day, it's always about helping your teammates get better. And I think emotional intelligence is such a critical skill. We all need it, no matter where we are in the organization.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. I love that you brought up succession planning. It's one of the big things you have to do. It's something you have to think about. Because, like we say, at some point, you're going to retire, you're going to go to another company. You're not going to work forever. So, someone has to be, and like you said, sometimes it's not going to be somebody in your company. If we're talking about improving and understanding, has there ever been a time for you, Amir, that you had to sit there and think, that emotional intelligence didn't work that time for you? It came out. The frustration came out. Have there ever been a time for you where that happened early in your career or currently?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I can think of a recent example where it almost caused me to react.
Mm,
You know? So I won't give specific I won't give the exact situation or the people or anything like that, but this was a moment where, I recognized within myself that I was receiving information that was not what I was expecting going into the conversation. And when I was faced with this dilemma, I had to very quickly remind myself that you listen to your body, listen to what your body is doing in this moment, feel it, because that's another part of just knowing yourself is when you can feel your body, because it's a biological thing. You can feel your heartbeat when it's racing, you can feel your mind, your face gets warm sometimes, your ears, whatever the case. Like everybody has a different way of paying attention to themselves. But for me, it's just trying to ground myself in my whole being and just saying, this is what this situation is doing for you. You didn't prepare for this particular moment in time, and what are you going to do next? So for me, when I was in that situation, immediately I said to myself, let this emotion wash over. Do not say a single word. You have two ears and one mouth, and that is exactly the order in which you should use it. Listen more, speak less. And then once that emotion washed over me, I had a moment of clarity. And then I decided that, yes, this is how I should tackle it. And, this has happened a few times just this year alone. But in every moment, I used exactly the same strategy. Listen to my body, let the emotion wash over you, and then speak up. And you don't have to have an answer right away. You don't have to give a response right away is another important lesson that I want to share here, because sometimes we feel like we must respond in this moment, especially when we're working with executive leadership. However, there are many ways in which we can politely ask to come back. And that's
mm.
another skill that we need to learn. Sometimes we're not ready to give an answer, and that's okay. We have to understand that you can come back. You can take a moment to take a deep breath, but start, at least in my case, recognize what my body is telling me.
Man, that is very important because I think, you bring up a great point, especially when it comes to, other executives. A lot of people feel that they have to respond or have to answer that right there because it's an executive who's asking. And I think you have to understand if you don't have the answer right now, you just don't have it. I can come back. Let me get that information for you. Be back shortly with that. Let me check on that for you, etc. But I think people have this emotion or mental thing that if an executive's asked me a question, I got to answer it right then and there. But sometimes you don't have the answer for it. So it's best, like you say, take a step back, come back with the right answer. You know, don't get frustrated because you definitely don't want to just spew out an answer just because someone's asking you. And lastly, before we go, I'm gonna say this to our listeners. If you want to actually have some great emotional intelligence going further in your career, take a martial art. It doesn't have to be jujitsu, it doesn't have to be taekwondo. It could be boxing, it could be running, etc. That will also help you regulate your emotions for the corporate world. Like I said, for me personally, it was jujitsu. I always talk about calmness and darkness. I'm so calm because of jujitsu. Puts me in so many areas that are so uncomfortable, that so frustrating that by the time I get to work, I'm pretty calm on everything. I get to make clear-minded decisions because my emotions are in check because of jujitsu. So I would tell anybody that it doesn't have to just be taekwondo, it doesn't have to be karate. It could be any martial arts, but you should take something that will also help you hone in your emotions to be prepared for the corporate world.
Couldn't agree with you more. I get the same advice. I mean, you and I must be reading the same script or something. Yeah, I tell people all the time, pick a sport, pick a martial art. I mean, obviously, I will always propose martial arts first,
Yeah.
but pick anything. I love boxing too. I trained in Kembo for a while, which is a combination of karate, judo, kenpo, and boxing. So find something. To your point.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a great way to end today's episode. It has been another great one. We look forward to many, many more, and we will definitely see you in the next one.